This film documents the Vietnam War in the words of Americans who served there. It features home movies and rare archival footage collected during a worldwide search, and now presented in high definition. Many scenes are graphic in nature, and viewer discretion is advised.
I was in World War II, fella, and I served 3 years. I know what it's about.
I have a son that's going to go into the army.
We fight because we must fight. If we're to live in a world where every country can shape its own destiny, we will not be defeated.
At the start of 1968, 3 years after U.S. ground forces first landed in Vietnam, there are nearly 500,000 Americans in country, fighting an estimated force of nearly 300,000 North Vietnamese regulars and Viet Cong guerrillas. U.S. military strategy is a combination of bombing key industrial and supply sites in the north, while launching massive search and destroy operations in the south. Dead enemy bodies, not territory, is the measure of success. With the numbers tipping firmly in America's favor, President Johnson and his top military advisors, including overall Commander General William Westmoreland, assure the American people that victory is within reach. It is only a matter of time before the NVA and VC succumb to their losses. The Vietnamese, however, have successfully battled foreign powers for over 1,000 years. And with a population of over 16 million, the North is prepared and willing to replace their casualties. For U.S. troops in the field, this means they keep doing the same thing day in and day out, under the constant threat of an enemy that is anywhere and everywhere.
Out here, the tension just builds and builds until you feel like you're gonna explode. Most of these guys would give anything for an excuse to squeeze off a couple rounds.
19-year-old Second Lieutenant Barry Romo has been in Vietnam for 6 months. He spent most of that time leading search and destroy missions.
Guys will do anything to break the tension. It's some of the blackest humor I've ever seen. Guys play mumbly peg with bayonets, throwing them at each other's feet, moving them closer and closer together. And I told them, I said, well, if you injure yourself,
you're going to be walking around here with that. And they didn't care. That whole question of just dealing with the incredible tension and stuff, and jokes and dirty humor, and when you're in the rear area, prostitutes and drugs and other things, that was real.
Mo and his men cope with the rhythm of the war, tens of millions of people throughout Vietnam prepare for the country's most important holiday, the Vietnamese Lunar New Year, or Tet. Tet marks the arrival of spring, a time to pay tribute to ancestors and look forward to good fortunes in the new year. Since the start of the war, it has also marked a time of peace, when all sides observe a 2-day ceasefire.
A lot of South Vietnamese soldiers have already headed home, though. But these past couple days, command's been trying to call everyone back. Apparently, we've gotten wind of the NVA's buildup around some of the cities. That was the first time I'd heard about
a planned offensive. And people in I-Corps, some of the intelligence people anyway, the ones I dealt with, believed it was going to happen.
Not everyone's taking it so seriously, though. Some guys are saying there's no way the communists can launch anything major. They're already all tapped out. But I'm not so sure about that. From what I've seen fighting these bastards in the bush, they're smart as hell, and they don't give up.
But as the sun sets on January 30th, 1968, many expect this year will be like every other, a night of peaceful festivities.
Quadrant 372, verified. This is Alpha 6. We have an extremely large force moving towards us.
All of a sudden, the radios start going crazy. Guys are calling in attacks from all over the place. Nobody knows what the hell is going on, but you can tell it's
something different, that it wasn't isolated. All these places getting hit at exactly the same time. You just sit there and listen, and it's like listening to a radio program, except that it's reality.
As the sun rises on January 31st, the confused actions of the night give way to a grim realization. Over 120 cities, towns, and military bases, including the capital of almost every province in South Vietnam, are under attack by an estimated 84,000 North Vietnamese and Viet Cong. It is the largest coordinated military action of the war to date. Unknown to the Americans, the enemy has spent the past 7 months slowly moving hundreds of thousands of mortars, artillery shells, small arms, hand grenades, and explosives into the south via the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Under the guise of the Tet celebrations, they hid these weapons inside truckloads of rice and carts of flowers and carefully moved them into position for their assault. The incredible scope of the Tet offensive catches the Americans by surprise, but it doesn't take long before they begin to fight back. At the embassy in Saigon, military police and Marine guards begin clearing out the Viet Cong. Just outside the city, at Tan Son Nhut Air Base, 905 U.S. ground troops engage in close quarters combat with 1,200 NVA. While American pilots lift off under enemy fire to support fighting elsewhere in the country. 400 miles to the north, mortar and rocket fire rain down on the 6,000 American Marines at Khe Sanh. An estimated force of at least 20,000 NVA have the base surrounded. Completely cut off by ground, they are running low on supplies. While the Marines on the outer edge of the perimeter resort to hand-to-hand combat. To the east, in the ancient imperial capital of Hue, a few hundred U.S. and South Vietnamese troops are tenaciously holding what little ground they can against the advancing 8,000 NVA, who are determined to wipe them out.
Nobody says a word. Although I'm literally about to bust, I've got so many questions.
Medical Corpsman Raymond Torres and his company from the 26th Marine Regiment are packed inside a C-130 en route to Hue. Less than 24 hours into the Tet offensive, U.S. troops are launching counterattacks aimed at reversing the wave of the enemy advances.
How bad is the fighting at Hue? How many wounded are there? What do I do when we land? Ask for instructions? Or just run to the nearest casualty and start working?
125 north at 15, United 12.
When nobody pays any attention to a hypermedic, they've all got their game faces on. After all, Marines don't ask questions. They just do. Right at that moment, the pilot comes on the radio and says we're not going to land at Hue. Orders have been changed. Then dead air. They don't tell the Marines anything until it actually happens.
We were just anticipating going to Hue City, and you didn't have time to think about it because you didn't know until the plane was ready to land that we were landing in Khe Sanh. That was our mindset, but either way, we had no choice.
The pilot pops on the intercom to tell us that Khe Sanh's taking heavy fire. He won't be able to stop the plane because they're taking mortars from every direction. So once we touch the ground, he's just going to slow down a bit, and then we'll have to bail out and head for the trenches. Bail out? What the hell does that mean? Feels like the whole plane's about to rattle apart. Plane's dropping fast. Everybody's grabbing a hold of something, getting ready to get the hell out. We're about to make one hell of an entrance.
Take it up!
Base is under siege. Everything's been shot to hell by enemy mortars and artillery. We're lucky we made it in here alive.
Hey, get behind something now. We got air.
After landing under intense enemy fire, Marine Corpsman Raymond Torres is in the thick of the battle at Khe Sanh. 2 days into the Tet offensive, the 6,000 American Marines are entirely cut off by ground, surrounded by at least 20,000 North Vietnamese, who are mercilessly pounding them with mortar, rocket, and artillery fire. Their main protection against being overrun is the precision flying of American pilots, and their accuracy in dropping one of the most destructive weapons of the Vietnam War, napalm.
Here comes!
The NVA is so damn close. Our pilots are dropping napalm right outside the perimeter. The canisters fall.
It's like balsa wood, kind of flutters, and it drops a little differently than a conventional bomb. And when it hits, it's just a big explosion, and it's just a ball of fire, and it just keeps traveling and just burning everything in its path.
Torres and his company of 150 men immediately move out to one of the small hilltop outposts that ring Khe Sanh. Only a few thousand yards from enemy positions, these outposts are the last line of defense against the advancing NVA and have been the site of bitter fighting since the start of the battle.
Our orders are to hike our asses up to the top of Hill 861A to reinforce the company that's up there. Everyone's nervous as hell. There's no telling how bad the situation really is. But rumor has it that most of the guys up there got their throats slit with knives or their guts spilled out by bayonets. The smell is sickening. That's all I could do to keep from retching right on the spot. Dead North Vietnamese are strewn everywhere. Shot dead only a few feet outside the perimeter. No one says a word. But they don't have to. The look on their faces says it all. It was something you're not really prepared
to see. And that's when it sinks in that how did we get here and what are we doing here, you know, and is this for real? And it sinks in that, yes, this is for real.
While Torres joins the struggle at Khe Sanh, throughout South Vietnam, U.S. and ARVN forces are launching a series of counteroffensives. Although the initial surprise of the Tet offensive resulted in quick victories for the enemy, within days, the NVA and VC are being driven out of almost every major city hit during the attack. But while the American military begins to triumph, the real cost of the Tet offensive is becoming clear.
One, possibly two armed personnel carriers that preceded us in here have been blown.
Unlike World War II, news coverage of Vietnam is not subject to government censorship. So as hundreds of war correspondents cover the battle, the images are broadcast into the homes of millions of Americans.
The infantry will move back into the tree line, hoping to re-establish contact with the Viet Cong.
Vietnam gives the American public their first unrestricted view of the graphic images of war. February 1st, 1968, an NBC cameraman is filming South Vietnam's chief of national police in Saigon when a Viet Cong prisoner is brought to him. The ensuing image becomes a symbol of the war's brutality.
Huh? Daddy.
Mommy. Daddy.
Yeah, good. Did you hear that, honey?
Come on.
Now say, Daddy.
Daddy.
Come home. Quick. Quick.
Mommy, no.
This past week, the children and I recorded 7 audio letters to send to Ben. It seems to be the best way to keep their minds off what's happening in Vietnam. Keep them away from all the coverage on TV.
Ann Purcell's husband, Ben, deployed to Vietnam 7 months ago. She is at home with her 5 children as graphic news coverage of the Tet Offensive fills the airwaves.
There was a lot of coverage of actual battles and seeing the men wounded and that kind of thing. And we watched TV, but when that started happening, we didn't watch TV very much. Our son, second son that was in 2nd grade, he started having a lot of stomach aches and this kind of thing. And the doctor finally determined that it was his nerves, because he told me one day after he had watched TV, he said, "Mother, I'm afraid Dad won't ever come home."
Everywhere we go, school, church, even out shopping, all anyone wants to talk about is the war. I'm just so grateful that in a few weeks we're going to take a trip to Hawaii to see Ben and R&R.
Hi, darling. I can't wait until we meet in Hawaii. Take care of yourself. Remember that I love you with all my heart. I miss you with all my heart. I'll be so glad when this tour is over. And I hope we never have to be separated again.
The ground never stops shaking. The mortars and artillery are constant. Everyone's exhausted. It's not even so much the physical work as the mental strain of it all.
Medical Corpsman Raymond Torres and his company of 150 Marines are at the defensive outpost atop Hill 861A on the outer perimeter of Khe Sanh. Below them, enemy mortars and rockets continue to pound the base's airstrip, making it increasingly difficult to land planes. More and more, the Marines are forced to rely upon aerial drops for food, fuel, and most importantly, ammunition. For the pilots and crews of cargo planes, the normally routine operation is suddenly transformed into one of the most dangerous missions of the entire war. 600 feet above Khe Sanh, the planes come under intense enemy fire. While the pilot attempts to hold steady, a crewman inside the belly of the aircraft crawls within feet of the open door and releases the supplies. For the Marines at Khe Sanh, the pilots and crews of these cargo planes are the unsung heroes of the battle.
Nightfall is even worse than the chaos of the day. 'Cause out here, where it gets so dark that you can't even see a hand in front of your face, Charlie owns the night. And he'll slip up on you and slit your throat. before you even have a chance to scream.
At night, the frontline Marines are at their most vulnerable. Supporting air and artillery fire is less effective in the dark.
All around us, I hear Marines screaming and rapid firing. NVA's trying to break through the line. Only nobody knows where they're coming from, and nobody could see a thing. Mortars and grenades are exploding right outside the trenches. I scrambled toward the screams of a wounded Marine. Just as I'm hunching over him, trying to stop his bleeding, something hits the dirt a few feet away. It's a grenade. And in that short amount of time,
everything
just
seemed to flash through my mind. I started backing away, and when I backed away, I put my hand up to my face to protect my face, and the grenade exploded.
For a moment, everything goes silent from the concussion. And I realize that now I'm the one who needs to be saved.
"200 miles to the south, at the American base at Pleiku, the nurses and doctors of the 71st Evacuation Hospital are rallying to save the lives of critically wounded troops from battles all over South Vietnam. Among them is Captain Elizabeth Allen, a 26-year-old nurse stationed in the Trauma Intensive Care Unit.
The first time I heard the hum of a chopper coming in low, I thought it was the most soothing sound in the world. But now, standing on the medevac pad of an army hospital, that same sound makes my heart race and my stomach tighten up.
Since the start of the Tet Offensive, the number of wounded Americans in need of hospitalization has nearly doubled from that of a month earlier.
It's the pace of it all that really wears you down. Back home, massive trauma and multiple amputees are rare. But out here, it's run-of-the-mill. The only way to deal with it is to go into sort of like robotic mode. You take the first one and you fix it, and then you go on to the second one and you fix it,
and you keep going until that's over. You learn to use all of your senses. If it smells bad, it's infected. If it's bleeding, you stop it. And you do the best you can with that. Because you don't have another choice except to crumble. I have to tell you, crumbling ain't my style.
Honey, I wish you a belated happy birthday and have many, many more happy birthdays. And I'll be there for your next one.
All week long, we've been replaying Ben's latest letter. Hearing the sound of his voice. It's the only thing keeping us sane amidst the horrible news of Tet.
Ann Purcell is awaiting news from her husband, Ben. She continues to send him audio letters, but for the first time, he is not writing back.
Our best distraction is always church. Being there, among friends, is comforting. After the service is over, I saw the pastor
standing in the hall with Major Jim Statler. And I knew that they had something to tell me that I probably didn't want to know. Our pastor said, "Ann, come into my study," and we all walked in, and he closed the door, and Major Statler said, "Ann, Ben's missing in action."
All of these horrible thoughts started racing through my mind. Is he dead? Is he wounded? Is he out there in the jungle all alone? Or is he being held prisoner somewhere, beaten and tortured at this very moment?
The Tet Offensive made it clear that the communists had changed their tactics. But they didn't do it overnight. Despite optimistic reports to the contrary, it's been changing for a long time.
U.S. and Vietnamese troops.
3 weeks after the January 31st surprise Tet Offensive began, U.S. and South Vietnamese forces have successfully driven the NVA and VC out of almost every major city hit during the attack. Khe Sanh still remains embattled, but for the most part, the U.S. military is returning to its strategy of search and destroy, chasing the retreating enemy into the countryside. Second Lieutenant Barry Romo is back in the field outside Chu Lai, where it is believed that several hundred enemy soldiers who fled the city are now hiding.
All of a sudden, I hear a huge explosion behind me. Everyone hits the ground. When I look up, I see my platoon sergeant laying in a pool of blood. He stepped on a mine. We were just headed to LZ for pickup. Another 15 minutes, and we would have all made it out of here just fine. As we're getting loaded, one of my men tells me there's someone looking for me. I head over to the chopper he points towards. And as I get close, I see this major hold up a sign.
And he had written, "Your nephew Robert has been killed. Your brother Harold requests that you escort the body home. Will you escort the body home?" And he didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't verbally say it to me. He didn't have the decency of a human connection. He had to write it down.
I can barely process what just happened. My brother had written to tell me that Bobby got drafted and was sent over here. But I was never able to see him. And now he's dead. When we get back to base, the staff sergeant comes up to me.
Told me how Bobby had been killed. He'd been in a major operation in a place called Don Hong, where they were working with the Marines. A friend had been shot, and just like in the movies, he had stood up and ran to help his friend. And he got shot in the throat, drowned in his own blood.
As the news sinks in, I start to realize something else. I'm leaving Vietnam. And I'm never going to see any of my guys again. What's going to happen to them when I'm not here? I don't know. Who's going to take care of them and make sure they get through this thing alive? After everything I've been through, after everything all of us have been through, it kills me to know that I'm leaving them behind. When I went to Vietnam, we thought we could win. Anyone who goes now after the Tet Offensive knows that they are going to fight for a lost cause.
The Tet Offensive becomes a turning point, not only for the U.S. military, but for journalists covering the war. On February 27th, CBS anchor Walter Cronkite, known as the most trusted man in America, returns from a week-long trip to Vietnam and steps out of his role as reporter to offer his personal view on the war.
To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe, in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic, if unsatisfactory, conclusion. But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
2 days after Walter Cronkite's somber analysis of the war, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, one of the Johnson administration's key architects for the Vietnam War, steps down.
I cannot find words to express what lies in my heart today.
Although he had announced his intended resignation 3 months earlier, McNamara's departure in the wake of Tet is seen by many as confirmation that the administration's Vietnam policy is failing.
How will this help end the war? Well, this hopefully is a democracy.
What becomes known as the credibility gap is vastly widened, as many American people see a strikingly different view of the war than the optimistic pronouncements of the Johnson administration.
All the statements are very different, and it's very hard to believe. One says this way, the other one says the other way, and I don't know what to believe.
I have a brother that's that just came back from Vietnam, and he talked about it, and it's a lot rougher than what they said.
National politicians seize the opportunity and openly speak out against the war. The senator from Minnesota, Eugene McCarthy, challenges President Johnson, his fellow Democrat, for the party's nomination for the coming election, and nearly defeats him in the New Hampshire primary.
The entire history of this war in Vietnam, no matter what we call it, has been one of continued error and of misjudgment. And many of us in the Congress followed patiently.
With his administration in turmoil and public support for the war at just 41%, Johnson addresses the nation.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. Tonight I want to speak to you of peace in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. No other
He orders a halt to the bombing of North Vietnam, in the area where 90% of the population resides, and announces an effort to start peace talks to settle the war.
50 million human beings.
He then drops a political bombshell.
With American sons in the field far away, with America's future under challenge right here at home, with our hopes and the world's hopes for peace and the balance every day, I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes or to any duties other than the awesome duties of this office, the presidency of your country. Accordingly, I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Eight days after Johnson's stunning announcement, the siege at Khe Sanh, the final remaining battle of the Tet Offensive, officially ends. The Air Force's relentless bombing succeeded in finally forcing the NVA to pull back and eventually opened the way for soldiers from the 1st Air Cavalry to break through to the base. The 77-day-long battle is the longest ever fought by U.S. troops during the Vietnam War, and one of the costliest. Of the 6,000 Americans at Khe Sanh, 274 have been killed and another 2,500 wounded. Of the estimated 20,000 NVA who originally encircled the base, 12,000 are dead.
I suppose part of me is still in shock. I thought for sure I was gonna die up on that hill. But somehow, we held off the attack.
Medical corpsman Raymond Torres suffers shrapnel wounds to his face, torso, and legs.
They always say, no Marine left behind. And they really mean it. Those Marines hauled my ass to safety. They were there for me when I was so hurt I couldn't do a thing for them. I suppose that's the hardest part of it all. The fact that I lived and so many of them died. I was the medic. I was the guy that was supposed to take care of them. They weren't supposed to take care of me. It's just very hard
on you emotionally because you do everything that you can and it's not enough, you know. And that's always weighed on me throughout my whole life.
In their final analysis, the U.S. military reports that 69% of the 84,000 NVA and Viet Cong troops who fought during the Tet Offensive are killed. The VC guerrillas suffer such devastating losses, both in numbers and to their command structure, that they are essentially wiped out as an effective fighting unit. Militarily, Tet is an unquestionable American victory. But for much of the American public, it will be the graphic images of death and destruction that continue to resonate the loudest. Tet has changed the war.